So Tom, welcome back to another episode of Just One Thing, where training gym owners get actionable insights to build their dream business. I'm going to make this a multi-part series. I'm not even going to think how many parts now, but in the last episode, we talked about Tom selling the business, and you gave this wonderful formula, right? So one question that I get a lot asked, and is let's go to the owner's part of it. Like you were saying, we take a salary and we take an owner's draw. Now, if I take a less salary, then my earnings go up, right? On the books at least. And if I take more owner's draw, then from the optics perspective, my valuation goes up. But if I'm a savvy buyer, I will see that and I'll say, you know what, I have to normalize this, because there's no way in hell that for the role that you're playing, you're only going to be taking 30 grand or 40 grand per annum. So walk me through that. Like from an owner's perspective, how much normalization would happen from a salary perspective from in the eyes of the buyer? Does that make sense? I mean,
yeah, but the formula, it's already based in. So what we didn't talk about in the first segment of this is, if somebody wants to buy my gym, one, just say, great, thank you, I'll give you an offering sheet. Never, unless ever give them a verbal.
okay.
Just say, yeah, I think it's worth 200, something like that. No, just give them an offering sheet. An offering sheet is a one-page sheet, and I hand it to my potential buyer. Well, it has several factors on it that are important. One is, here's what I think it's worth. Here's how I came up with it. And I will use the EBITDA formula. But if we remember from the first one of this series is, that 3.5, that's your secret number. That's what it's worth. But that's not what it's really worth. That it's just not there. I tried to buy an old, didn't get the sale done, but I tried to buy an old red 67 Mustang. And guy had it for sale, and I drove by. I was like, oh man, that is such a cool old car. So I said, how much? And he goes, 26,000. And I go, what are you based on that? Because that's what I want for it. And I go, so I went and looked it up, and I go, that particular car was worth like, 19 or something. And I said, I'll give you 19. And we started a debate because I knew, but he started to tell me that, it had some history and all this. But I looked on this, dude, just give me an offering sheet. Give me a sheet that details all this crap in your head, justify the value of the sale. And he had no justification for this. There was nothing. So when I give you an offering sheet, if I give you a verbal, there's no justification for that. It's just a number like the old guy pulled out for his car. But if he would have had a sheet and how he came up with the value, and the car had some history, won a car show years ago, and all this stuff that he started to tell me, I might have been interested in paying a couple $1,000. But the way he handled this, like, I don't even want to deal with you. You're making stuff up. That's what people think about when they buy a gym. But hey, you want to buy my gym? Here's an offering sheet. Here's what I want for it. I give them the EBITDA formula. But keep in mind that secret number is this. So if I'm selling that car, I might list it at 26, but I know in my head that my drop dead lowest price is 21. So I can negotiate between 21 and 26. So if I know the value based on this formula, so my gym is worth by that formula 600,000, and then I ask 800, I've got a $200,000 range. But you always have to know in your head, what is the number? What you and your family have to sit down and say, what is the number we will really take for this? So we know the 3.5 is what it's probably really worth. And we start at 6 to 7 multiple. And then that difference is my way that I have to negotiate. Of course, we always want that. Even though we know it's 3.5, they really do sell for 4, 4.2, 4.5. They do sell more if you've got the 12-month receivable and stuff we talked about. The owner's comp in there is built into the formula. So on that offering sheet, the value, the formulation, and I put down owner's comp, because that shows in the formula when I give it to them that this is it. And I took out owner's comp. Last year, I took out 65,000 in salary. I took out 100,000 in bonuses. I took out, $3,600 in car payment, and I took out $12,000 insurance for my family. So I assume the owner isn't sophisticated ever and give them everything on the offering sheet. Then I have that. Then I have the lease information, and then I have approximate number of members and are they on a receivable base. So I don't mind giving anybody that. If they want validation of all that, then they should sign a non-disclosure agreement, which means that he can't get all the information then open across the street because he thinks I got a great area of town. So I will give him my offering sheet, but when he wants me to prove all these numbers, I say I certainly will. You got to sign a non-disclosure. So the offering sheet is there, but when we explain it to him, to answer your question directly, that's how the salary becomes irrelevant because it's just clearly stated, this is coming back to you as a purchaser. This is what I took out. Of course, when I'm gone, that's your money. And that's the essence of what it says.
Right. But there's something I did want to point out though, Thom, like from an owner's comp perspective, what's going on in my head is I'm also doing work in the business. So there's a component of the owner's comp that I am doing for maybe playing the GM role, maybe playing the trainer coach role, maybe playing the admin role, whatever it is, the janitorial role, which the buyer needs to replace with an actual human being to do the work. So I'm almost thinking, unless I'm getting this wrong, that the owner's comp, there are really two components to it. One component is the replaceable salary that you would need to pay, the buyer would need to pay, you buy my gym to replace me. And then there's the other owner hoo-ha stuff that I am passing through the business, but I'm really pocketing, like the insurance payments, car payment, cell phone payment, which is not really supposed to go through the business. It's really a personal expense, which you will tend to benefit from. Is that not fair?
Yeah, but if you remember what we just said about it on the offering sheet, I said I had down that I took 50,000 salary and I took 100,000 as bonuses to owner. The 50,000 salary, that would be what I would pay to a manager to run the gym. So so the expense side's already showing the burden of paying a manager.
Right, but that will get normalized, right? Because now if I'm a savvier gym owner, then I know that a manager really gets 50,000, but I'm only paying myself 30,000 as a manager because I'm trying to take, because these are
I'm saying on this particular example, and from the first session, one of the things I stated is always pay yourself a base salary of $40,000 to $50,000, depending on the market, because that does emulate exactly what you're saying. That emulates the role of the manager.
Got it.
So that's there. So when you say normalized, I'm saying it's already in the expenses. I took out 50,000 salary. That part would probably stay in because you're going to have to pay a manager, or that becomes your base salary, but that makes all the other key performance indicators valid because I also assume it took out $100,000 in bonuses to owners. Okay, so that goes to you as a buyer. But the 50 you may take as if you're going to work your gym, or that's what you may use as a starting salary to pay a manager to run your gym. So we are in essence normalizing it by leaving one segment in instead of just saying I took out 300,000 last year's owner's comp. Well, what the hell does that mean? How does that work? Nope, I took out 50 here, 100 here, car payment, insurance, and cell phones. And all those are write-offs. All those are things that I can legitimately write off through taxes if I keep the right records on them. But I agree with you 100%. That's why we split it. That's why we'll always want the owners to take out a base salary, but then show all the bonuses over here because that makes the sale much easier. You're absolutely right. But yes, we're building that into the formula, but we're also building that into the expense session versus payouts to bonuses to owner or shareholders.
Fair enough. So that's on the owner side. Going back to the formula on the debt minus the debt, right? So does it make sense for me to have debt, not have debt? Because I'm going to subtract it anyways from a valuation perspective, but debt could also be a good thing, right, Thom? Because I get it at cheap. Why will I not take it? So talk me through from a owner perspective, knowing that I'm running the gym and I have to be mindful that 5 years from now, I want to sell it. maybe I never will, but I may have to. What do I do with the debt component as I get ready to sell it? Like, should I reduce the debt? Should I increase the debt at that time? Like, what are tricks that I should be doing with that component? Because with that component doesn't get spoken about too much.
The debt is, I'm kind of visualizing the whole rant on this, but it's the debt is not controversial, but inexperienced gym owners really mess that part up. So if I'm selling it, before we get off that track, if minus the debt, that means if there's 100,000, so if the gym's worth 800,000, but there's $100,000 in debt. So when you buy the gym, I have to pay that 100 off. So that will lower the price of, you're paying less because, I've got to pay that debt off. I can't, but some owners have debt structured so they can pass it through to the buyer that keeps their payment down. So the gym, if it's worth 800 minus 100, the gym's really worth $700,000, but I've got to pay that $100,000 off somewhere. Either he pays it off the buyer or I pay it off as the seller. So, or if the debt is passed through and serviced by the owner, the buyer, because at that point, then he can get it cheaper because he just assumes his debt is part of the value of the gym.
Right.
So the bigger picture you said is something I just love to rant on is, probably the worst owners are the ones that, and I take all kinds of crap on this when I used to teach this in workshops, is I'd say the worst owners are the ones that are debt free. And they just well, that's crazy. My dad said, or my accountant said. I said, well, what you're telling me is you don't reinvest in your gym. Debt is good, managed debt, but not just debt, but managed debt. So if we look at a gym, we use in the first segment of this. So your rent factor is normally about 1/3 of the expense of operating a gym. So if I look at that, so $15,000 rent, my overhead might be around $45,000. Now in the higher metro markets, that can go a little higher. But just for the example today, so if I'm in Manhattan, for example, my rent might be 1/4 of my operating costs. So that might be a $60,000 because the cost of labor is so much. But for the sake of most owners, unless you're in New York, downtown San Francisco, markets like that, the 1/3 tends to work pretty across the board. So if I look at that and say, okay, it's 45. So for example, we'll round it off to, I've got a $15,000 rent. $50,000 if I pay all my bills. Well, 10% of that should be long-term debt. Long-term debt is 5 years or longer. I prefer 7 to 10-year debt. And some of the new SBA instruments, for example, can be 20 years debt. But there's a point where you're paying too much interest. So 7 to 10 is good. 20 is okay, but I'm going to pay some extra payments on. We'll come back to that. Now, what I do is say if I take $200,000 in a loan and I have a 10-year structured debt and I make the payments as promised for 3 years, and let's say I reduce it by approximately $30,000. At that 3 years, I can go, good, I project the debt out fresh. I go back to the bank and say, I want to turn this into a new 10-year note. I've got 7 years left. The payment either comes down because I have less to finance forward, or the payment stays the same because I take the $30,000 back out and put it back into the gym for new turf, new update my equipment, update something. Because I'm used to that payment, I just project the payment ahead. So I can either lower the payment because I don't need to reinvest, or I take the 30 back out because I've already made the payment based on 200, but now it's 170 note. So I just take that fresh note out. So I either take a fresh 200 or I take 170 and finance it out for the lower payment. So every 2 to 3 years, you should push your debt ahead. Now, short-term debt is stuff that's 3 years or less, garbage debt. And when you first open the first 2 or 3 years, you will have an additional about 5% of your expenses in garbage debt. You put $20,000 on your credit card because, oh my God, I forgot I needed that extra air conditioner. You've got equipment leases that are only 3 years. I prefer 5, but you get into a short equipment lease. And all of a sudden, you've got that extra debt. So if I'm looking at $50,000, I can handle 10,000 or 10% of that, or in this case, 5% debt, long-term debt forever. My business plan works in a training gym with a 5% debt ratio, so forever. But the first three years of operation, I run my 10%, and then I got the extra 5, and then over the first 3 years, it should come back down toward 10 as I pay off the garbage debt. So that means in this case, I can handle an extra $2,500 in garbage debt. Debt it's not good, but in a gym, it's a business debt. It's managed. It's part of operating a business to keep the business constantly fresh and new. Going back to our EBITDA formula in our first session, one of the things we were talking about is, how do I continue to build value? Well, I have to keep the gym. Every 3 years, I have to reinvest back into the gym to keep it up. A side formula on that is, I think you need to invest roughly the equivalent of $150 per 1,000 square feet every month to keep your gym fresh. So if I have a 5,000 foot gym times that, I've got 750 times 12. Well, that's what it takes to keep my paint fresh, to repair the damage in the bathroom, to put up new stainless steel stuff for my coat racks in the winter. So that wall needs to come down. It's grody. So $150 per 1,000 square feet for capital improvement, and $150 per 1,000 square feet for repair and maintenance. So I run those as separate piles, and those should be thought of as separate. I put those as line items on my budget for my gym, because if I don't spend it this much, I sweep it to what's called an accrual account. An accrual account is money I know I'm going to have to spend, but I'm not going to spend it today. So for example, I know I'm going to have to buy a hot water heater someday. They always blow up.
Yep.
So I just put $150 a month, or 150 times 1,000 square feet. So in this case, 750 a month in repair and maintenance. I just move it into the account. I didn't need it this month. Next month, I move another 750. Third month, another 750, and the toilet blows up. So somebody sits down, stumbles, knocks it, cracks my toilet. Okay, you know what? I got the money. I don't have to take it out of my operating expense because I did it. Capital improvement's the same thing for equipment and the big picture things, turf, flooring. I can cure it here. I usually kind of look at flooring and stuff as capital improvement. I'm constantly keeping it up. Those two budget lines really help you do this without incurring more debt, because I actually build the cost of the operation of the business into a savings account that can't be touched. Because I'm going to spend it sooner or later. That $2,000 hot water heater is going to go poof. And you know what? I don't scramble and I have to put on my credit card, because I've been saving every month for the last year, knowing something's going to blow up. I just didn't know what.
No, I think that's a great point. That's a life lesson right out there. Do it with everything. Like, even when the cars are paid off, like you were saying, Thom, I still set aside $200 a month into a car account, just because I know something will happen. It's bound to. And then once it does happen, then you're like, yep, I have the money. It's all good. You don't even miss a beat then. But yeah,
it's so hard to get young owners to start to see their life in the totality of the debt. So the reality is, we always get to that point where we have to choose between debt and freedom. And the less debt I have, the more freedom I have to live life on my own terms. So one of the earliest things you can start to learn is just short-term garbage debt, which is 2, 3, 4-year debt with high interest rates, is really, you just got to move away from that. So debt is freedom to not have to live check to check and be scared on how you're going to eat tomorrow and what you're going to do with your kids tomorrow. And what am I going to do with my spouse? I can't even take care of that person. So if you start to understand debt in relationship to your business, the same rules do apply to your personal life.
All right. So on that note, Thom, let's end this. Let's have another session on, I have so many questions going back to the valuation piece. So we'll go there.